Today, we're looking at the most horrific sports deaths ever recorded. From a competition turned into a nightmare when the wall itself became the danger, to a young stable worker who made one fatal approach to an unpredictable animal in the craziest way ever. It was June 14th, 2016. The converted warehouse in Kathmandu's industrial district was humid and loud, filled with climbers warming up for the regional amateur bouldering competition. Rijan Thapa, a 27-year-old refrigeration technician, chalked his hands near lane 3, unaware of a structural oversight. Rijan had been climbing recreationally for 3 years, training at a neighborhood gym 3 nights a week after his day shifts ended. He wasn't chasing sponsorships or professional circuits, just the satisfaction of solving problems that required precise body tension and dynamic movement. He'd placed well in 2 smaller indoor competitions earlier that year, which earned him entry into this event. Friends at the gym described him as methodical with his route planning, but aggressive once committed to a move. He preferred lateral problems over vertical endurance climbs, favoring explosive power over sustained grip strength. The competition organizers had repositioned a slab section on lane 3 the night before to adjust route difficulty for problem C3. Indoor bouldering walls use large plywood panels with climbing holds attached to metal frames, often set up on site by volunteers. A volunteer installer noticed the upper anchor bracket didn't sit flush against the frame, but was told by the setup coordinator it was stable enough to proceed. No certified installer, sign-off, or third-party inspection was conducted, and the route was cleared for competition use that morning without further review. The panel on lane 3 was poorly secured at the top, and without a backing strip, it could be pried loose if pushed from the side. A serious risk, given that a climber's sudden moves can place hundreds of pounds of force on it. Rijan began problem C3 at 11:42 in the morning. 2 other climbers stood nearby, waiting their turn, and a judge positioned himself 10 feet from the wall to observe. The problem required a right heel hook onto a high hold, a move that would shift Rijan's entire body weight laterally against the panel. He committed to the move, planting his heel and pulling his torso upward. Witnesses heard a short metallic crack from behind the wall. The upper screws pulled out through the plywood, creating a pry effect that rotated the panel outward on its lower attachments. The entire 7-foot panel rotated outward like a drawbridge, pulling away from the frame. Rijan dropped with it, still gripping the holds. As the wall section fell forward, he landed flat on his back against the patchwork gym mats, which were compressed and slightly misaligned under the panel's corner, leaving his chest and neck exposed to the metal edge of the frame. The panel followed immediately after. The corner edge struck Rijan across the chest and neck before pinning him to the mat. Judge Suresh Katel and another climber rushed forward, attempting to lift the panel, but its pinned angle and weight made it immovable without leverage. Event staff called emergency services at 11:44 in the morning. Fire services arrived 9 minutes later and removed the panel using hydraulic tools. A medical examiner's report described Rijan's death as caused by severe crush injuries to the chest and neck, noting that the panel's weight and impact led to instant incapacitation. The event concluded quietly, with no further competitions held at that venue. The organizing body implemented mandatory third-party inspections for all modular wall installations at future events. Rijan's funeral was held the following week quietly, attended by family, close friends, and a few climbing teammates. The service was brief, with no media presence, reflecting the private mourning of those who knew him personally. It was February 3rd, 2018. The community hall on Prescott Road in Liverpool was half filled with local boxing fans, most nursing pints and chatting through the undercard bouts. The ring stood under harsh fluorescent lights, surrounded by worn canvas and creaking wooden bleachers. Callum Rourke, a 24-year-old warehouse shipper, taped his hands in a cramped side room, preparing for a 4-round amateur bout. Callum had been boxing for 3 years, fighting on small local cards to supplement his warehouse income and help support his 2 younger siblings after their father left. He was disciplined about training, but reckless about recovery, continuing to spar during periods when he should have rested following concussion warnings issued by the Regional Boxing Commission, which had inconsistent enforcement at community-level shows. Amateur boxing involves 3-minute rounds with protective equipment and strict medical oversight, though enforcement at community venues was inconsistent. Medical records, released with family consent, later showed Callum had never disclosed chest discomfort during pre-fight exams, and his friends said that he feared disqualification would cost him the small payment or expenses he was relying on. His opponent that evening was Dean Holcroft, a similarly inexperienced fighter with an even record. Neither man was particularly skilled, but both were durable and willing. Trainer Malik Osi noticed Callum breathing heavily during warm-ups and asked if he felt ready. Callum dismissed the concern and continued shadowboxing, attributing the fatigue to a double shift at the warehouse the previous day. The bout began at 8:04 in the evening. Rounds 1 and 2 were unremarkable, both fighters landing occasional jabs with no significant power exchanges. Callum appeared slower than usual, his footwork flat and his defensive positioning sloppy. Between rounds, Osei repeatedly told him to keep his guard up and move his feet, but Callum barely responded, staring past his trainer toward the back wall. Round 3 started with Holcroft pressing forward more aggressively. Callum backed toward the ropes, absorbing several light shots to the arms and shoulders. At the 1:35 mark, Holcroft threw a standard left hook to the body, landing just below Callum's ribs with moderate force. It was not an exceptional punch by any competitive standard. Callum stepped backward and lowered both gloves to his sides. He collapsed forward onto his knees without attempting to brace his fall. Referee Simon Yates initially waved his hands, believing Callum had slipped on loose canvas. Callum tilted sideways and rolled onto his left side, his mouthguard still in place, his eyes open but unfocused. Yates crouched down and shouted his name twice, with no response. Yates immediately halted the contest and signaled for emergency services. Ringside medic climbed through the ropes within seconds, checking Callum's pulse and breathing. His respirations were shallow and irregular, stopping completely within 15 seconds. Patel began chest compressions immediately. AED pads were attached and found no shockable rhythm. The emergency call was placed at 8:13 in the evening, immediately after the medic completed an initial assessment of the unresponsive fighter. Paramedics arrived in 6 minutes, continuing advanced resuscitation en route to the hospital, where Callum was pronounced dead at 9:02 in the evening. Post-mortem examination identified cardiac tamponade due to rupture of the left ventricular wall. Microscopic sections showed focal myocardial fibrosis consistent with prior myocarditis, likely worsened by cumulative blunt trauma. The coroner noted this type of cardiac failure was extraordinarily rare in someone of Callum's age. The bout received brief coverage in one local newspaper. No video of the fight was ever released publicly due to a strict no phone policy enforced by the promoter, and the only event camera footage was archived and later seized by investigators. Callum's funeral was held 2 days later at a local chapel, attended by his parents, siblings, close friends, and teammates. The service remained quiet and private, with no media presence. It was October 9th, 2015. The Municipal Gymnastics Center in Bucharest District 3 hummed with the usual sounds of practice, chalk dust hanging in the air, the rhythmic thud of bodies landing on mats, coaches calling corrections across the floor. Mara Iliescu, a 13-year-old training for the upcoming district junior meet, stood at the end of the vault runway, adjusting her wristbands and chalking her hands. Mara had been training at the center for 6 years, showing enough promise to earn a spot in the competitive stream, but never quite breaking into elite consideration. She was a solid all-around gymnast, reliable on bars and beam, though vault remained her weakest apparatus. Her coach, Elena Dobry, had recently introduced upgraded vault entries to boost Mara's difficulty scores for the district meet scheduled 3 weeks away. The new technique required more speed and a higher block off the table, skills Mara was still developing. Her parents paid monthly fees to the municipal program and trusted the coaching staff's judgment on progression timelines. Vaulting requires athletes to sprint down a runway, hit a springboard with precise timing, and propel themselves onto and over a padded table using only their hands for push-off. The apparatus demands exact body positioning, too low, and the gymnast's torso strikes the table edge, too high, and rotation becomes uncontrolled. That afternoon, the springboard had been repositioned closer to the vault table to accommodate younger athletes training earlier in the session. No one adjusted it back to standard distance when Mara's group began their turn. Coach Dobre instructed repeated attempts despite Mara consistently landing low on the table, her abdomen making contact with the front edge on her first 2 passes. 2 teammates, Irina and Daniela, watched from the side as Mara struck the vault edge twice, each impact audible across the gym floor. On her 4th attempt, Mara accelerated down the runway and hit the springboard at an awkward angle. She under-rotated again, her torso slamming directly into the front of the vault table with significant force. She completed the vault, landed on her feet on the far mat, then walked slowly to the side and sat down. Practice continued around Mara for the next 20 minutes while she remained seated, and no staff monitored her vitals or kept her still. Eventually, she laid back on the mat. Irina approached Mara to check on her condition. Mara did not respond. Her face had gone pale and she was breathing shallowly. Irina called for Coach Dobre. When the coach reached Mara, the girl suddenly vomited onto the mat. Her lips had turned blue. Coach Dobre immediately called emergency services at 5:32 in the afternoon. The ambulance arrived 11 minutes later, paramedics finding Mara unresponsive with a weak pulse and distended abdomen. Mara was transported to the district hospital, where emergency surgery revealed massive internal bleeding from a lacerated liver. The repeated impacts had caused progressive tearing of the organ tissue, with the final vault strike rupturing a major vessel. Surgeons worked for 3 hours but could not control the hemorrhaging. Mara died on the operating table at 7:48 that evening from hypovolemic shock and organ failure. The Municipal Sports Authority conducted an internal review that identified the springboard positioning error, inadequate injury monitoring protocols, and lack of immediate medical assessment. Child protection authorities and the police were notified. The springboard and vault table were recertified with measured marks, and staff were retrained in first aid response and emergency activation. Coach Dobre received a formal reprimand but continued working at the facility. It was August 21st, 2014. The evening air inside a municipal sports facility in Osaka tasted of humidity and worn rubber mats and the sounds of what should have been routine sparring rounds. Naoki Sera, 31, had been attending wrestling-style grappling classes at the community gym for 8 months, purely for recreation and fitness. He worked long days managing concrete pour crews and found the physical intensity helped him decompress. He had no competitive aspirations and no formal martial arts background. Friends from the gym described him as enthusiastic but impatient, often rushing techniques before mastering basics. Instructors had repeatedly corrected his tendency to muscle through movements rather than use proper form. The sport involved controlled throws, takedowns, and submission holds practiced with partners of varying skill levels. Proper technique required precise body positioning, hip rotation, and controlled descent to prevent injury. Advanced throws like suplexes demanded years of practice and were typically restricted to experienced practitioners. The gyms posted safety guidelines explicitly prohibited overhead throws during open sparring sessions. The mats were worn, roughly 2 inches thick, and placed directly on concrete without a sprung subfloor, offering little shock absorption on a head-first impact. That evening's class ended at 6:45 in the evening, but several members stayed for informal sparring. Naoki paired with Koji, a 28-year-old office worker who had been training for 6 months. Both men were inexperienced and had been warned multiple times about attempting advanced techniques without supervision. The head instructor had left for the night, leaving the gym owner monitoring from the front desk. Naoki specifically requested to practice throws, dismissing suggestions from more experienced members to wait for instructor guidance. No qualified spotter or instructor was present when the advanced throws were attempted. By 7 o'clock in the evening, Naoki and Koji were attempting standing exchanges. Koji secured a rear waist lock around Naoki's midsection, positioning for a German suplex. A brown belt training nearby noticed Koji struggling to maintain balance and control. The throw required explosive hip drive, backward arch, and controlled rotation to safely deposit the opponent on the mat. Koji possessed none of these fundamentals. Koji attempted the throw anyway. He lifted with his arms rather than his hips, failing to generate hip drive or bridge, and his chest collapsed as he attempted the arch. Naoki's feet left the mat, while his torso remained nearly vertical instead of arcing backward. The trajectory was wrong from the start. Naoki descended head first. His neck compressed violently as the back of his skull struck the mat first, absorbing his full body weight plus Koji's driving force. The impact was immediate and severe. Naoki's body went completely limp, collapsing in an unnatural position. Koji scrambled away, immediately recognizing something catastrophic had occurred. Another athlete rushed over and knelt beside Naoki, checked for responsiveness and breathing, and, with help from another member, kept his hands steady on Naoki's head and neck to avoid movement until professional help arrived. Naoki's eyes were open but unfocused, his breathing shallow and irregular. The complete limpness and lack of muscle tone indicated severe upper cervical trauma. Paramedics arrived 8 minutes later, following the gym owner's call. They immobilized Naoki's spine using a cervical collar and a spine board, evaluated his breathing and vital signs, and transported him to the hospital. He was rushed to a regional trauma center but showed no neurological function. He was pronounced dead at 8:34 in the evening. The autopsy identified atlanto-occipital dislocation with tearing of the upper cervical ligaments and brainstem disruption consistent with catastrophic injury. The injury caused immediate physiological death at the moment of impact. The facility immediately banned all overhead throws during unsupervised sessions, implemented mandatory instructor presence for advanced techniques, preserved CCTV footage of the mat area, and reviewed their limited first aid with the staff. It was May 12, 2017. The morning air in Ghent, Belgium was mild and clear. Perfect conditions for cycling. The roads around the Eastern Circuit were lined with weekend riders preparing for the regional club race. Peter Van Oost was a 42-year-old postal sorter from the city center who had been riding competitively for 7 years. He wasn't a professional cyclist, just a dedicated amateur who spent his weekends racing with the local cycling federation. His garage held 3 road bikes, countless spare parts, and medals from regional competitions he'd won over the years. Friends described him as enthusiastic, but sometimes overconfident, often pushing harder than his skill level warranted. He'd completed this exact 28-mile circuit at least 20 times, memorizing every turn and straightaway. Competitive amateur cycling requires riders to maintain speeds of 25 to 35 miles per hour in tight formations called pelotons, where dozens of cyclists draft inches apart to reduce wind resistance. At these speeds, even minor obstacles or course changes can trigger catastrophic crashes affecting multiple riders. Peter's carbon fiber racing bike weighed just 15 pounds, built for speed rather than stability, with thin tires offering minimal margin for error on uneven surfaces. That morning, Peter arrived at the starting line around 9:15 a.m. Other cyclists noted his visible excitement as he prepared to improve his previous time. What he didn't know was that city maintenance crews had installed a temporary metal drainage barrier along a section of the course the night before. The barrier, extending nearly 40 feet along the roadside, lacked reflective tape or warning signage. Race organizers had been notified, but failed to communicate the hazard to riders during the pre-race briefing. Several experienced cyclists had expressed concerns about the blind corner where the barrier was placed, but organizers dismissed their warnings, citing schedule pressures. The race began at 9:45 a.m., with 78 riders. Peter positioned himself mid-pack, maintaining a steady pace through the first 18 miles. Approaching the problematic left bend around mile 23.6, the peloton was traveling approximately 32 miles per hour. The turn tightened more sharply than riders anticipated, compounded by the new barrier reducing the usable road width. A cyclist, riding 3 positions behind Peter, watched as Peter drifted slightly wide while exiting the turn. His front wheel snagged the exposed lip of the metal barrier, producing an abrupt stoppage that pitched him forward. The impact was immediate and severe. Peter was thrown headfirst over his handlebars onto the asphalt surface. His helmet, which had been improperly fastened with a loose chin strap, came off on impact. Luke braked immediately and dismounted within seconds. Peter lay motionless on the pavement with severe head trauma. Other riders stopped, creating a protective barrier around the scene. The race marshal radioed for emergency services at 10:18 a.m. The ambulance arrived 12 minutes later, but paramedics could do nothing. Peter had died from massive cranial trauma and brain hemorrhaging. The medical examiner confirmed death occurred within minutes of impact, caused by catastrophic head injuries. They said that a properly secured helmet might have reduced the severity of his injuries. Local council quietly launched an investigation into the barrier placement. The Cycling Federation suspended use of that route indefinitely. Peter's death led to stricter pre-race safety protocols requiring course inspections within 24 hours of events. It was March 13th, 2013. The afternoon air at Suzhou's largest commercial riding facility was mild and still, carrying the familiar sounds of horses shifting in their stalls. Lian Zhou, a 22-year-old hospitality management student, had just started her afternoon shift at the stable where she worked part-time to cover tuition costs. Lian had been working at the facility for only 8 weeks. She'd grown up in Suzhou's urban center with no prior equine experience, taking the job primarily for its flexible hours around her university schedule. The stable employed her for basic tasks like mucking stalls, filling water troughs, and occasionally leading docile horses to and from paddocks. Her supervisor had noted in her file that she showed enthusiasm but lacked fundamental understanding of equine behavior. The facility operated as a commercial riding center, offering lessons and trail rides, maintaining 30 horses ranging from gentle lesson ponies to high-strung competition animals. That afternoon, a recently purchased mare had arrived from a breeding facility in Hangzhou. The 6-year-old chestnut had been transported for 3 hours in an unfamiliar trailer, arriving visibly agitated. Her tail was tightly clamped, eyes showing white, and she stomped repeatedly on the trailer floor, signs of high stress. Horses are prey animals whose primary defense mechanism is flight, but when cornered or startled, they can deliver a hind leg strike capable of lethal blunt force. Standard protocol required the senior handler to assess new arrivals before general staff interaction, but he had left for the day at 3:15 in the afternoon. The facility manager, pressured to get the expensive animal settled before evening feeding, assigned Lian to move the mare from the transport stall to a permanent paddock. Lian had never handled a new arrival before, and the manager provided no specific instructions beyond attaching a lead rope and walking the horse outside. Jian, a stable hand cleaning an adjacent stall, watched Lian enter the area at 3:38 in the afternoon. The mare was pacing in tight circles, ears pinned back flat against her head. Her head was high, and she swished her tail sharply, clear signs of agitation. Lian approached the stall door, opened it without waiting for the animal to settle, and stepped inside. Instead of approaching from the side where the horse could see her, Lian walked directly behind the mare to reach the halter hanging on the far wall. The mare shifted her weight forward. A nearby stable hand reacted as Lian moved within striking range, but it was already too late. The mare delivered a powerful hind leg strike with her right leg, connecting with the left side of Lian's skull, just above her ear. Approaching from directly behind removed the horse's line of sight, increasing the risk of a defensive kick. The impact produced an audible crack that Jian heard from 15 feet away. Leon dropped instantly, her body collapsing straight down. She showed no appreciable movement, though Jian later noted a brief, shallow gasp before she became unresponsive. She hit the stall floor face first without attempting to break her fall. Her arms remained at her sides, and Jian saw no further breathing movement. The mare bolted to the corner of the stall, eyes wide. Jian ran to the facility office, where the manager immediately called emergency services at 3:41 in the afternoon. The facility had no functional CCTV covering the stall, so the incident was witnessed only by Jian. The ambulance arrived 14 minutes later, paramedics finding Leon unresponsive with no pulse. They declared her deceased at the scene. The medical examiner's report confirmed death resulted from catastrophic blunt force to the left temporal region, causing immediate brainstem damage and multiple skull fractures consistent with a high-velocity strike. The riding facility faced no prosecution as a coroner's inquest and a workplace safety review concluded the death was accidental. The facility received a formal notice from the local labor bureau and revised its internal protocols. Senior handler presence became mandatory for all new horse interactions. Thanks for watching. If you like these stories, click here.